ask you guys, since that film, of course, culminates in a military assault on the city that we're in right now, have either of you been back here to DC? I know you didn't shoot that very believable, compelling climax of that film here, but is this your first time back in DC since Civil War?
Yeah, this is going to sound very kind of cute, but actually, as we were coming into land today, both Ray and I did look at each other and were like, this is sort of eerie. I thought I was going to get chucked out as I landed. They would just say, fuck off, go home. But thankfully it didn't happen.
So your earlier films, Alex, again, Annihilation and Ex Machina, these would kind of fall under the broad umbrella of science fiction. Now, two times in the space of a year, we have one film that's kind of about the deep polarization that we have in American politics, and one film you're recreating a primarily, not exclusively, American military operation. Is that just coincidence, or are you taking a greater interest in American subjects?
Actually, I'll answer that seriously. Years ago, I did an adaptation of a novel by a British novelist called Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote a book called Never Let Me Go. Really, really beautiful, quiet, powerful novel, which we made into a film. And I was talking to him, and he said, if you look at storytellers' careers, you'll see huge changes from story 1 to story 8. But if you look at story 5 to story 6, you'll see story 6 grew out of story 5. And I think this is a good example of that. Ray and I worked together on Civil War. I had an approach to Civil War, which was to kind of take from the grammar of news footage and documentaries slightly more than cinema to an extent. And in the sequence, I'm very grateful, so many hands went up. So in the final sequence where some soldiers fight their way down a corridor towards the Oval Office, that was organized by Ray, and it used some of his colleagues, ex-colleagues, one of whom standing over there actually, as the military moving down the corridor. When I didn't give Ray any direction on that. Ray was functioning as a director with those soldiers. I just said, do what you guys would do. That was it. That was the only real note. I'll take care of the cameras and I'll take care of the photojournalists who are sort of covering this, but you just do what you do. So then when I got the footage back into the edit and I cut it together, I found that it was more interesting to avoid the time compressions that cinema normally does when it's editing something, and leave in the exact rhythms of what Ray's world and Ray's colleagues do. This sort of strange staccato rhythm of a gunfight, and the sort of inexorable movement and the explosions of violence, and then the moments of reorganization. I found that really interesting, and it immediately occurred to me that something I've always wondered as a sort of speculation is, could you make a film that was trying to forensically recreate reality? Is this the thing to do it with? So it grew straight out of working with Ray, and I contacted Ray and said, listen, do you have an account of something that could last an hour and a half? We can slide the hour and a half around within a time frame, but we can't compress and expand the hour and a half, because that would immediately be to fall into the tricks and processes of cinema, really, time compressions and cutting characters or creating, over-dramatizing things, all that rubbish, or not rubbish, but all that stuff. And so yes, sorry, super long answer. I didn't mean it to be that long. It flowed straight out of Civil War in that respect.
Yeah, well, you kind of answered one of the next questions that I had in the queue about the compression of time there, because I was trying to think if there are any other films that could be considered analogous to this, and I thought of maybe Black Hawk Down, because that's adapted from a nonfiction book, about the Battle of Ramadi.
Right, but just not to diss Black Hawk Down.
Right.
But the second you use score, you are creating a kind of a manipulation of sorts, and what we were trying to do was to do that as little as possible.
Well, and that film does compress time, and it does have composite characters and the storytelling tools that you denied yourself. And it sounds like that was the brief from the beginning. You went into it saying we're not going to do this.
Yeah, I'm gonna shut up now because Ray should speak. But what I'd say is, if anyone else is familiar with dogma films, which was a sort of movement of cinema from, I don't know, gosh, 20 years ago now, a Swedish film, Danish gave themselves some rules to work by. We were a dogma-like film. The dogma rule was nobody is allowed to add anything or change anything or give any kind of note whatsoever unless they were there. So anybody who was there was allowed to contribute to in effect, to the narrative, to the sequence of events. But I wasn't allowed to do that, the studio wasn't allowed to do that, the DOP, the actors, everybody just had to listen to Ray, which is now what I invite everyone else to do, because I have spoken too much.
All right, so well, let's ask about your projects, the war fighters, the selection, some of the documentary projects that you've been involved in, and then how you decide to tell this story that you were personally involved in, that you lived as a dramatic recreation type film rather than a documentary. What makes you decide that that's the way to go?
Elliott. So at the end of the movie, it says for Elliott, and I'll elaborate on that. Elliott does not recall what took place over 20 years ago. When he first woke up out of the hospital, immediately he started asking questions. But it's a lot. There's a lot going on, and there's multiple perspectives of what happened. There's over 20 guys in that movie. And so when we write it all out in literary form, rarely do we forensically approach it and take all of our memories or our after action reports and put it into one single narrative. And I think he was having a really difficult time understanding that, because we all have imagery of it. And year after year he would send emails to us and asking to retell the story, and he would have questions. And so once I got into the business, that was kind of like a driver for me, a motivator to say one day I want to do a visual medium for him. And it was a journey. I pitched it a few times, but if you know the business, I didn't have the clout. I don't think I had the experience. I'm glad it happened when it happened. War fighters, for example, that was, obviously an attempt to give back to the community and kind of a precursor to this. But learning the arts of filmmaking, learning what worked, what doesn't work. Because I wanted a voice not only for Elliott, that was kind of where the rules came from. If it didn't happen, because I wanted this to be for Elliott. I wanted him to know what we knew, to see what we saw, to hear what we heard. And in some cases, to smell what we smelled. I remember on set, we were throwing smoke grenades and the guns going off, and he's texting me, he's like, I remember this smell. So he doesn't remember the incident, but it was all for him, and with that, the rules, obviously followed, which is we're not allowed to invent anything. So that's kind of the why, the journey to ultimately making the decision. I mean, the decision to do it was a hard one. There's lots of stories, with the 20-year war. There's so many stories. I caught up a lot of friends, like Ranger friends, Green Beret friends, you name it. And there's these stories over 20 years that really resonate through the military and the veteran community. Battle of Fallujah, Battle of Ramadi, Takugar, there's a lot. So there's lots of stories to tell. And I really had to ask myself, was I ready to tell this story? Because it was going to kind of open up this can of worms, or this, I compartmentalized it for so long, and so I had to be ready to open that up. And that was trusting Alex, building that relationship with Alex, and knowing that he was going to help me be accurate to that.
I love that you guys use the tagline, everything is based on memory, because I feel like I, just as a film goer, I have an aversion to the phrase based on a true story, because I always...
Because then what follows is not going to be true. That's the problem.
Yeah, but I want to ask, what about the Rashomon effect? Where different people will remember things differently, even if it's not something as traumatic as combat.
It's a really interesting question. I found it completely fascinating personally. I have to say that when I began this with Ray, the intention was to try to recreate reality. and to therefore to make an honest war film. Okay, so that was the intention. However, what we had to work on was memory, and memory is a really strange thing, as we all know, but also simultaneously forget. So memory is subject to all sorts of different things. One is it's subjective. It's also affected by the passage of time. It's hugely affected by things like concussion or shock or trauma. And so the whole film very quickly became about confronting different accounts of the same thing. Sometimes they would corroborate, sometimes they wouldn't, sometimes they just required unpicking. So Mikey Sowers and Brian Alazawi, two of the people that you see in this film, both said, yeah, I was in a machine gun fight on the balcony on the roof of this house, but I couldn't tell you who was with me. And so we were able to figure out that both these guys were up. They didn't say the other one was there, but they both knew they were there and somebody else. That's a perfect example. It gets stranger when you have two people saying, I did this. And both of them are saying, I did this thing, and neither of them are lying. You can tell by the way they're talking. You can partly tell by the kinds of men that they are actually, that they are actually innately humble and inclined to play their role down rather than pick it up. So when they say, I did this, you feel sure that they really do feel that they did it, but you have two people saying they did exactly the same thing. So what happened? And I suspect what happened would be in that instance, they both have a memory of an image and they ascribe a first person experience to that image, but one of them is wrong in some senses and one of them is right in some senses. And then Ray and I would cross-reference everybody we spoke to and figure out logistics. And sometimes a third person would then get interviewed who would help clarify. And sometimes it was by geography. It was about the layout of a room. And if somebody was there, then they couldn't have suddenly teleported to there or whatever it was. So it would be false for us to say, this is a true story, or this is exactly what happened. We became aware quite quickly if there'd been GoPro cameras all around or a documentary film crew, what you just saw would not precisely tally up with the actual events. But what we could be true to was people's memories, their experience of it. And that contains an enormous amount of truth of its own. It's just a different sort of truth from a factual timed sequence of events. But we got as close as we could, but we did.
Yeah. So this isn't a film that pauses to introduce everyone. Just in case anyone didn't pick up on this, we do see Ray in the film. D'Pharaoh Woon-A-Tai is if any of you have watched Reservation Dogs from that series, he's the actor playing Ray in this film, the communications operator, and the guy who pulls Elliott back into the house after he did the IED attack. Ray, tell us about casting an actor to play the 2006 version of you.
Yeah, I mean, for all the guys, because I had D'Pharaoh was important, but they were all important because they're my friends. We did interviews, they expressed their feelings. But specifically D'Pharaoh, there wasn't a lot of actors we interviewed for him. But I think we had a very similar background. I liked where he came from. He was early, which right off the bat was impressive. And when you give the expectations, right? Like it's going to be this hard, it's going to be this difficult, and this is what I require from you. His response to it right away was the mindset, the attitude of it. If you get somebody who's like, I'm not really sure if I want to do that, you're the wrong guy, right? So immediately there was no hesitation. It was just like, yes, I want to do it. So just that comfort level, just understanding that he was setting those expectations and he was ready just to chew it up was, I knew he was the right guy. Yeah, and the same thing for all the other guys. We weren't necessarily looking for like, I need you to talk and look like my friends. It was to embody their essence, their spirit of what they did. Because we all, everyone did some amazing, heroic things that day. we each person had their turn, and so I needed people that were on board. They had to be, we all had to work in concert for one objective, which is to tell this story. And so they were representing my best friends, and so that was important to me. Yeah.
What about casting the actor to play Elliott Miller?
Yeah, I mean, Cosmo Jarvis, obviously there's a lot of other factors that go into like just me picking them, but he's a great actor. I think I couldn't do the interview process that was Alex, so I think you should speak to your, hit the accents and whatnot.
I'd worked with Cosmo a few years before, but what I would say is that everybody knows good actors. It's not film directors know good actors, everybody knows good actors. I've never heard anybody say Philip Seymour Hoffman was a bad actor. He was a great actor. When you see it, you know it. And so often it's not so hard picking them as whether they're good actors. You can just see stuff they've done and you'll know whether they're good. Ray had various criteria. One of the criteria I thought you might mention, because it's such an interesting thing, is to do with youth. One of the distortions that Hollywood will inevitably do is cast slightly older people because they're established and that makes them bankable. Mm. So the fact that they've been around a while means that they're sensible to cast because they're big names. But these soldiers are often very young, and when I was talking to Ray, we started this by talking for a week, and Ray just downloaded everything he could, and I just wrote it down as best I could. And one of the things was, so how old was that guy? How old was that guy? And I'm a civilian, and I was personally surprised that what I kept hearing was 21, 23, 24. I've got a 21-year-old son, so it's quite shocking for me to think of my son being picked up and dropped into a situation like that. Some of them were as old as, I think one guy was in his early 30s, like the officer in charge, like 27 at that time or something. So this was another factor, I think, was youth.
So we were speaking a little bit before the film ended. Ray, you said you left the Navy in 2014, and you had started to work in film a little bit even before that. And Act of Valor was well, you actually appeared in that film, right? And this,
I did.
What are your hopes for this? Well, what would define success for a film like this for you? And is there anything particular to veterans issues that you hope a film like this can accomplish?
Yeah, I feel it's succeeded already. I mean, we've done a lot of veteran screenings, and I've had some great feedback. And not just like, oh, that's a good movie, but just, I think it's the acknowledgement of it. I think oftentimes when you get out, I know I felt invisible for a long time, that people didn't understand. And I didn't understand either. Like, I didn't know what was fucking going on with me. I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. And I've had friends and loved ones that would ask, but I was like, man, I don't even know. I don't even know how to describe that to you. So what I want, it's succeeded already because that is starting to come out. It's like, hey man, thank you for doing that. I've had a hard time like describing what I went through. It may not be the whole movie, but there's maybe certain sections that we've all experienced. And this is a voice. It's not the voice, but it's a voice. And if it could start this, there's some good war movies out there, but it's told from probably a director who's never seen combat. And so this is my attempt to do it. And if this raises the bar or breaks the mold of, not having to compress time or combine characters and adjust the story and stay true to the story, then I think that's it's an evolution. If you go back and compare how realistic it is to some of the popular movies that you mentioned, there's something different, and I think it's because Alex and the A24 team, everyone was really open to just like letting us make the movie that we wanted.
I want to open this up for audience questions in just a moment, but I have one more for you. Francois Truffaut says you cannot make an anti-war film. His buddy Steven Spielberg says every war film ends up being an anti-war film. Where do you gentlemen land on this question?
I think you can't talk honestly about war without being anti-war. That doesn't mean war should never, under any circumstance, happen. There are circumstances where it's required, but it would have to be a last resort. But war is inherently something that is appalling, and it is very broadly misunderstood how appalling it is. I would think it's fair to say. That's where I stand. I think Truffaut's wrong, because Come and See, if anyone's seen that, is an anti-war film. It's a film about the Second World War. It's sort of set in Belarus, and it's an incredibly brilliant film. It is impossible to watch that film and walk out of it thinking, fuck yeah, war, come on, let's do it. So yeah, anti-war, 100%. Spielberg, I guess, is right. I suppose I'm agreeing with him, because what he's saying is any statement about war, if it isn't anti-war, is essentially insane. So, yeah.
Ray, do you have a take?
No, I mean, yeah, I wasn't trying to put it in a box. I mean, I think war, how do I say this? Yeah, I mean, it's an anti-war film, obviously. But I think we didn't make it as an anti-war film, obviously, to what Alex is saying. But if you watch this and it's like, just trying to think how to say this. I had it in my head. Sorry, I've been blown up too many times. No, it'll come back to you.
Yes. No, we will come back to you. Do we have questions in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
You talk about the other films, and there really have been some amazing war films, and this one's different because of you, Ray, and it certainly shows the courage and the deep emotion of that. I'll try again. There have obviously been some incredible war films, and about Iraq as well, and this is different, and by someone who has been there and seen it. But when you think about what it has meant to veterans, and probably a lot here tonight, and those who may know war, be close to it, what is the intent for civilians that is different from those other films, beyond the beauty of the way you've done it? What do you want them to take away?
Great question, because you just brought back what I was trying to say. So thank you. You read my mind. The intent. There's obviously the main intent, which was for Elliott, but I think the secondary and tertiary effects of that is you have an active duty military or a veteran who doesn't know how to describe what he's feeling, and you have the loved one who is kind of wanting to know. And until they go through either discovering it, figuring out how to describe it, there's like a gap there. So there's that. And then for somebody, this is what I was gonna say, is if you're gonna decide to go to war, this is what it looks like. There's no bagpipes, there's no violin playing. Yeah. This is what it's gonna look like. And it's the youth that goes and fights it. And we have some of the best warriors we have the best warriors on the planet, and they will answer that call. Yeah. I will answer that call. As broken as my body, as destroyed as my body is, I would do it so that no one else has to.
Thank you, Roy.
So be very careful on when those decisions get made. And I would just love for them to reach, if this raises questions of like, why were you there? What does that mean? What does show of force mean? And if it just starts a conversation piece, history tends to repeat itself. And if you forget this, then shame on you.
So it's sort of a responsibility.
Absolutely, sure.
To figure out.
Yeah, there's a lot of veterans that are struggling right now. And you cannot do it. You cannot care, not ask, and that's your prerogative. But that's just my opinion on it. Yeah.
Michael, can you project, or should I run up?
I can project. Thank you for the film. I felt like I didn't breathe for 80 minutes of the whole experience. Sort of riffing off that question, Was there a conversation about doing a documentary and having your colleagues speak about their experiences versus doing this? And I'm also curious, like the being contained in the 90 minutes really gave me as a civilian, you know, you get a little bit of the futility of some of the exercises that you're involved in, but also you don't get the grand picture. But we really wanted to focus on the moment. I guess that's just a statement and not really a question, so I guess the documentary question.
Yeah, to answer your question, no, we did not talk about the documentary. But
Oh, we did.
I'd
like to answer that
This is the
question.
Rashomon effect.
Not only we did, I was really pissed off that we didn't. Because some of the best films are films about making films. And there's a great one about Apocalypse Now and Werner Herzog, what's it called, Burden of Dreams, just like wonderful films about making films. I spoke to Alon, and I said, Alon, you have to get a documentary crew down here covering it, because this is going to be unusual. It is an unusual process. It's an unusual film. You've got to do it. Alon was one of the producers, and on day one I said, so where's that crew? And he said, I thought you were joking, and there was no documentary. But I think it's a real shame, because at the end of the film you see some little snippets of film that were taken on people's iPhones. And if you cast your mind back, one of them, for example, is of Charles Melton following a guy with a blurred out face, who's one of the people that was in this incident, and he's still serving, so his identity is protected. And he's showing on a recreation of the street, a very accurate recreation of the street, stepping over prosthetic body parts, how he stepped out onto the street and shot somebody, and then picked up some gear and went back inside. And Charles Melton is following him, watching him very closely. The layers, the meta, not that meta, the more interesting old-fashioned meta, sort of layers of complexity in what is happening just in that one moment, at that one fragment little bit of film, or of Elliott arriving on the set for the first time and Ray giving him a hug. I mean, the whole shoot was filled with such moments, so I really regret it wasn't recorded, but we recorded it in another way in its sort of primary intention, so that matters.
All right, yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kat Martinez. I'm a Navy veteran, and I want to thank you for making this film, but you for your vulnerability. My question goes along with your intention. You mentioned bridging the gap between the service member and their spouse. What I'm hopeful that you'll extend or shed some light on. I work for a veteran service organization, and a big issue that we're trying to address is how do we reach those in special operations to come forward. I understand there's sensitivities when it comes to the missions that they fulfill, but how can we better assist them to get the care that they deserve?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the answer to that, because some of my friends would still be alive. We're a small community, and it's a unique culture. I think the soft culture is very unique, and I think we have too much pride sometimes. We're very like ego-driven people. Asking for help is a really, really difficult thing for us to do. But for me, in my experience, I can only help one person at a time. But I think it's really like on their friends and their guys. It's really like it's got to come. Like I will never go to those things because it just feels weird to me. It took me a long time to feel comfortable to go in to ask for help. That was like my biggest downfall. I did not. I was ashamed to ask for help. I felt that like I'm a SEAL. I've been selected to do these things, and I just like couldn't do it. It was just an ego thing. And so it took my friends to finally be like, hey man, it's time. Like, it's time. And I had a daughter who was growing up super fast, and I was missing it. And yeah, so it took my friends. So I would say maybe it's just trying to find whatever their group is, and you may not find them for a while. I was locked in my house, super dark for long periods of time. And so it's a hard one. I wish I had like a clear answer, but it really is their friends, their loved ones that are going to pull them out of that stuff. Sorry.
I really wish we could stay here and talk all night, but we have to let these gentlemen go. So please, Alex Garland, Ray Mendoza, let's thank them for